I'll say good afternoon to each of you and thank you for your participation. My voter registration card does indeed confirm that my name is Gary O'Bannon. And just a bit about my sordid background. Prior to joining Block full-time in January, I spent 34 years working for the city of Kansas City, Missouri, all 34 years in HR, with the last 17 as being HR director, which I believe qualifies me under the ADA as one of those recovering HR directors. But fortunately, teaching at Block has allowed me to continue to get my fix on human capital management. And boy, what a time to be able to do it. So we all know that there's good and bad about human resource people. I've heard all the names that you call us. On the one side, most of you hate us with all the rules and processes. But on the other hand, our ace in the hole is that you need us. And I think that certainly is the case in this COVID era. So I'll leave it up to you to determine which of those is the good and which one of those are the bad. So here's a poll that Andy is going to launch. I think it's a really critical poll. COVID-19 officially arrived in March, and a workplace that was already complicated by having 4 different generations in the workforce to manage became even more complex. I don't want to bury my lead here, so I'll say it now. My number one recommendation, and you'll hear me say this a couple of times through this presentation, is to consider placing an HR person or a lawyer on a retainer if you don't have a representative already in your personnel schedule. I'm going to discuss this and all the other issues that you're facing as you operate your business. And I'd also like to thank you for the services that you provide to our communities, because we know that you're not dealing with easy times right now. All right, so assuming that you can still see my screen, I won't hit each of these points, but I do want to talk about COVID-19 and the law. When we did this session a month or so ago, things were kind of in flux, but I think the advice coming out of the CDC and the EEOC has stabilized for the most part. I'll close the discussion on a discussion about remote work and how some employers are monitoring their employees who are working remotely. Much of this session is going to sound like a law class, but the good news is that most of this is going to come down to not overreacting, treating your employees under 65 consistently, and essentially just doing the right thing, which I heard Jeff say in his presentation, and I'm going to second that. Okay, let's see. Did I hit the wrong slide? All right, so first up, let me begin by talking about how COVID has altered the workplace in the area of reasonable accommodations. Okay, 1, because there's a pandemic, the EEOC is allowing employers, even those covered under the ADA with 15 or more employees, to ask workers if they're experiencing COVID-19 symptoms. The goal is obviously to try to stop the potential spread of the virus, but what doesn't change is that any information that you get in this process has to be kept confidential because it's a secure medical record. So keep that in mind. The most common COVID symptoms that you will still see cited are fever, chills, cough, shortness of breath, and sore throat. So it's pretty much like flu-like symptoms. 2, the EEOC also allows employers to conduct a medical assessment to those returning to work, and also for job candidates when you give them a conditional offer of employment. So what does this medical assessment look like? I usually have my Q-tip and I forgot it, darn it. So let's first start with what it doesn't look like. You're not going to stick a swab that's 5 times as long as that normal Q-tip up anybody's nostrils, okay? Although I did hear that the newest test doesn't require it to go up as far in your nose. So I guess that's a good thing if you've ever had to do a test, right? But anyway, you can take a person's temperature. I strongly suggest doing so with one of those handheld scanners that is pointed to the forehead. You want to be as less invasive in these assessments as possible. So don't use any mercury thermometers or anything like that. I go to the barber still about maybe once every, let's say 4 weeks, and he has a thermometer that he has me put up under my arm. I guess it works. You know, I think the handheld scanners are probably the best way to go. So we're at the point now where you might be thinking about a common question. Does everyone who has a fever and registers as a fever have the onset of COVID? Well, the obvious answer is no. So you'll need to ask the employee if they're experiencing any other symptoms as well. So you're looking for trends. Now, some of these evaluations are not going to be easy for you to make the call. For example, someone says, I have a cough and a sore throat. Does that mean they have COVID? Obviously not. For example, the weakest part of my body is always my throat. And I don't get sick very often, thank goodness. But when I do, it almost always rests in my throat. But a lot of times it doesn't go any further than that because that doesn't equal COVID, right? So what do? My advice is that if you're facing one of these fork in the road calls where you're just not sure whether or not the person has the onset of COVID or is in the throes of COVID for that matter, it's best that you're going to err on the side of safety and you don't grant them access to the workplace. Because again, the bottom line is you don't want the potential to spread the illness. So you should be in some reasonable safe harbor. And then that gives you time to get on the phone, talk to your HR rep or your legal rep. And since 71% of you have that, you're going to be in a really good shape. The other 29%, again, give strong consideration to joining that 71%. Okay, another common question. So you mean to tell me that every day I have to have this long 6 foot apart employees waiting to get their temperatures checked with my handheld scanner? Okay, well, the answer is you could, but you don't have to. So to avoid that, you can streamline these assessments by providing your employees with these self-screening forms. They're easy to draw up. I hesitate to say get one off the internet because they're so easy to have set up. Again, that's where your legal counsel comes in. But every blue moon, I'll get a massage. And the day before my massage on my phone will come these 7 questions that I've answered ad nauseum now. And all you do is check no, because they're usually asking you whether or not you've either been exposed, you've been out of the country, whether or not you've had a temperature. I mean, pretty basic questions. So they don't take very long. You can also send these forms via email or have them call in each day. And then they can make a declaration and you can go through the form, put their name on it, and then document it. But let me be clear, HR person here. Having it in writing is by far the best option. And I think we know why. I mean, once the answers are being documented and they're not in the control of the employee, and then you're taking down their responses. I mean, if you get a clownish kind of employee, I'm sure you don't have any of those, then the debate is on. That's not what I said. You marked it down wrong. Well, if you give them the control of the form, then you can take away that possibility for that 1%. So remember, completing these forms, though, is considered to be work time for hourly employees, obviously, right? It's those that are eligible for overtime. So any time that it takes them to complete this form is compensable under the Fair Labor Standards Act. And since most of your time systems will probably be in these 0.6 increments, 0.6 times 10 to 60 minutes in an hour. So it shouldn't take any more than 6 minutes really to complete the form. If it takes any longer than that, your form's probably a little bit too long because, again, most of these are just check the bubble. I think I'm on number 4. All right. Any request for an alternative screening due to either a medical condition or a religious belief continues to be a legal request for accommodation under the Americans with Disabilities Act. And you have to evaluate it as such. So nothing changes in that respect. That's not new law. Okay. The ADA requires this legal process that the law will quote this language that says it requires an interactive process with the employee. So again, that's your cue that this really needs to be handled by your HR or your legal reps. And the process is littered with all kinds of quicksands because the law does shade toward, obviously, the benefit of the employee, as it should. Okay, so here's what I'm going to call the first quicksand moment. And you'll hear me say this maybe 3 or 4 times during this phase of the presentation. The results of the screening can only be used to determine whether or not you're going to provide access to the employee. You can't use these screenings to terminate employment or to disqualify job applicants. I think we know why, but I'll go ahead and tell you. It's a virus, okay? And the vast majority of us generally get over viruses. So once they're over it, they can then have access to the workplace.